on the Scottish Gaelic Tattoo Handbook, and I wanted to show you where we were because today what we're going to go over is making like modified sort of prototype API that we can use for something. And the reason that we got to do this, let me go ahead and share my screen so I can show you. The reason we need to do this is that in our app, so this is our app, we did mostly our like home screen and this menu screen, and now we need to do browse. And so the thing about browse is that we're going to be able to search through stuff, but also you're going to be able to go between phrases and clans, then come in here and get individual phrases like Scottish Gaelic phrases, right? So, for example, I want to be able to go, to place an identity and like get these phrases. Now these phrases have to come from a backend somewhere, and once those phrases have come from that backend, we can also get to it here. Let's see which ones here. Family we can click to. We want to be able to get those phrases from a backend, which we don't have so far. So I wanted to show you how I managed to prototype something like this relatively quickly, rather than having to build an entire server to service this information before we can continue working on the mobile app. The reason that you might want to prototype rather than starting the server right away is if you don't necessarily know exactly what you want your JSON form to look like, what you want in your database, those kinds of things, and or if you're working with a relatively non-technical product manager or product owner who wants to be able to modify a database, but the thing that they're familiar with isn't databases or application interfaces, but rather a spreadsheet. So something like this. So what you're looking at right here is a Google Sheets spreadsheet into which I have put the Excel document that the product owner, that the expert for this app sent to me. And so you can see here that we have different rows, different columns. We have the English word or phrase, the Gaelic word or phrase, and this is important, the glossary section, so that we're going to be able to identify which of these words is supposed to come back from the API given a specific glossary section, because that's how we're going to divide it up when we do like these categories right here. Okay, so this is what I have. I have this sheet, and what I want is an API, but I still want my product owner to be able to add things, modify things, and even change the structure in this sheet relatively easily. I don't want them to have to worry about like database migrations or messing with an app. So I'm going to show you my kind of quick and dirty solution for this. This is how I'm going to go about with the other people on this application, figuring out exactly what the data needs to look like, and then later we can build a server, but for now this is going to help us get going. So the convenient thing about Google Sheets is that it is made so that you can get a JSON API from any given sheet. And the way that you're going to do that is first you are going to go to, let me find it, publish to the web. So you want to go to publish to the web. Okay? And so when you do publish to the web, you're going to click entire document. You're going to leave this as a web page. And then you're going to want to make sure that automatically republish when changes are made is checked. Then you want to make sure that the appropriate sheet is published. Mine is sheet 1. I only have one sheet in this doc. And then it says stop publishing. You probably won't see this. The reason I have this is that I already published this. You're going to click publish, and you're going to confirm that that's what you want. And then you're going to get this link right here. You don't have to use this link. That's not what you need. But you do want to publish to the web in order for this to work. So that's how that's going to work. So that's step 1, publish to the web. The second step of what you need to do is you need to go to share, and you need to make sure that anyone on the internet with this link can view. They don't all have to be able to edit it or anything like that. It just needs to be anyone on the link with the link can view. And if you are making your sheet for the first time, this is probably going to say only you can see it, and then you're going to click this change thing, and this is where you're going to get the option to make anyone with the link a viewer. So we've done two things. We published to the web, and then we've shared it so anybody with the link can view. Then what you want to do is you want to go into your URL and you want to get this ID. So this is the ID that you're going to use right here. So you want to copy that, okay? You're going to copy that ID. The next thing that you're going to do is we've got this URL, and this is provided to us by Google Docs. And I can put a link to this in the description so that you can change it out. Basically, you take this URL right here, and then what you're going to do is you're going to paste your ID right there. And then afterwards it says /1. This is your sheet number. So you'll put your sheet number in there. Then /public/full and then alt JSON, okay? And so that's going to give you this JSON. Now the thing about this JSON is, and you can see in this JSON that it shows that like it's not particularly query friendly JSON. It happens to be JSON. You could absolutely use it, but the keys are like $T and stuff like that. It's just not well formatted for using in an actual application. So in addition to having my sheet public, what I do is I use a service called GSX to JSON. And so for that, what you use for GSX to JSON is you take this different URL, and what you're going to do is you're going to put your ID in there, and then you're going to add this query parameter and sheet equals whatever your sheet number is. So you'll notice you use the same two variables in this URL as the URL that you get directly from Google Sheets. Just the sheet ID and the sheet number. This one here, you don't even necessarily have to use. I wanted to show it to you so you know you have an option for getting JSON out of a Google Sheet automatically without using another service. In addition to that, I'm showing you this other service, which I find more like easier to use for a client, because as you can see, now we don't have like $T keys and all that stuff. This looks more like JSON that you would use. And I can show you an example right here where I pre-formatted it for you. Exact same JSON that you just saw. All I did was format it. So what you can see is that we're given back a JSON object with a key of columns, and this sorts our data by column. We also have an attribute in this JSON called rows, and that sorts our JSON by row. So I'm not sure that I can show it to you. Yeah, there you go. Columns, rows. So you get the exact same JSON data two different ways with this JSON response. So that can be nice because it means that whichever way is going to be easier for you to query, whichever one fits your needs for this data better, you can use that one. So for example, with columns, you are getting, give it a second, this is a really big JSON response, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So you can see that the keys are English word or phrase, explanation in italics, Gaelic word or phrase, blah, blah, blah. All of the keys are keys from the actual column names of our columns. Now in rows, it's going to look a little bit different, okay? So what you're getting here is each individual row is a hash where the key is the column name and the value is whatever the value was for that row. So you're getting back an array of rows instead of a dictionary with all the columns in it. Okay? Now here's the thing about this JSON. As you may have gathered, it's extremely large. So let me show you how big it is. I've got this sheet, and I'll hand it to you. My sheet is pretty big. It has probably 1,000 rows in it. Yeah, just under 1,000. Okay? So this is like not the smallest sheet in the world either, but this JSON is huge. Like if you look at my scroll bar over there, it's pretty small. This is going to be a lot to parse through, and it could potentially slow your app down. So what we need to do is we need to reduce the amount of JSON that we have coming through here. Now, in like an app type of situation, potentially we would paginate it or something like that. There are a lot of relatively advanced techniques that you can use. You can use all kinds of filtering, paginating, and everything to reduce the size of your JSON responses. I'm going to show you two things that you can do in GSX to JSON in order to reduce the size of your JSON responses. And in order to show you these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the GSX to JSON documentation, which you can get at gsxtojson.com. So what it's going to show you here is that there are some query parameters that you can put into your request in order to get the rows, the columns, or to even use query parameters. There's a rudimentary query parameter thing in here as well. So check it out. I told you the JSON response automatically comes back with both the row representation and the column representation. So what it shows you here is that you have an optional query parameter that defaults to true for rows, and setting it to false will return only column data. Same thing for columns. You can set this to false to return only row data. So the first thing I recommend that you do is take a look at your data and determine which one is going to be better suited for your application. So for my application, right, I have to go through and I have to separate each of these rows according to what their glossary section is. So I think I want this data to come back actually by row, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end of my query here, and I'm going to put and column, is it column or columns? Columns. Columns equals false. And I'm going to run it again. Okay, and so what you're going to see is that when I scroll, let me make sure that this is true. Columns is false. Okay, so what you can see is that previously columns came first in our JSON response. This time rows came first in our JSON response, and it's a little bit hard to tell, but my scroll bar is larger because I've eliminated half of the data. Now it's still a lot of data. Still a lot of data. And the thing is that we're never going to need all of this data at once. A really good rule of thumb with client applications is that if the JSON is so big that it's slowing your app down, it's probably also so big that no actual person is going to need that much data on screen at once. So filtering is going to be a really good option for you. So if you look at our designs again here, you'll see we never need all of the phrases at once. We just need the ones for a particular category at one time. I need only the family ones, or I need only the place and identity ones. Now on a server, what we would do is we would implement filtering specifically on the glossary section so that we get only each glossary section at a given time. We can't exactly do that in GSX to JSON, but we do have a rudimentary feature that we can use to do like 80% of that. And what it is you can put this Q query parameter. It takes a query string, it's case insensitive, and it will add any row containing the string in any cell to the filtered result. So what this means is I can't query specifically on the glossary section having the word family in it, but I can filter on any part of that row, any column having the word family in it. And even though that's not only going to get me glossary entries that are in the family section, it'll get me only the rows that mention family in there somewhere, which is going to give me a much smaller JSON response. And then I can filter through it a second time to specifically filter on the glossary section in the client application itself. Is it perfect? No, of course it's not perfect. But what we're doing here is we're building a prototype API that's going to allow us to iterate fast. And this is good enough for me for the prototype. So if we go back to GSX to JSON, what we want to do is, so we've got our whole string here. We have this query parameter, columns equals false. Now I'm going to add another query parameter, ampersand Q equals family. Now remember, it's case insensitive, so even though we have family capitalized in our actual data, I think we have family actually capitalized in our data. Yeah, look. So even though family is capitalized, it's going to bring back lowercase family instances, which is fine with us. So family, and Q equals family. Now check this out. I'm going to run this. First of all, look how much faster my JSON came back. And second, when I scroll, you're going to notice that the scroll bar is much, much larger because there is much less data coming back. Now, is this still kind of a lot of data for a given query? Yeah, it is. And ideally, we'd be doing some paginating or something here too in order to make the query to return only as much data as we're going to need to see on a given page at a given time. But what we have here is a rudimentary filtering JSON solution that's going to allow us to iterate quickly on what we want our server to serve up before we have built the server at all. And this can be really valuable for you for building a prototype server in a situation where you want to focus on the client, on the mobile application, and do a client-first server development approach where you figure out exactly what the data needs to look like for your app to function properly before you've necessarily built this whole big, potentially expensive back-end solution to serve up that data, which you might end up just having to change later. So that's it for this. We're going to work some more on the client later in the week, but I wanted to show you first how I go about building a prototype server really fast that I can iterate on quickly and that people who don't necessarily know the tech will also be able to work with, because all they have to understand is a Google Sheet. All right, so we'll talk later in the week.